The sleek silver ship of the Galactic Concorde hung in Earth's orbit like a gleaming jewel. Inside, 12 alien representatives sat around a crescent table. Their forms varied and strange. Some had multiple limbs, others glowing skin, but all shared one trait. They looked uncomfortable as they studied the human delegates. Tahoe Park stood tall among his fellow humans. As Earth's lead diplomat, his calm voice and steady hands betrayed none of the anxiety he felt. This meeting would determine humanity's place among the stars. "We have studied your history extensively," said Counselor Nava, a blue-skinned being whose 4 eyes blinked in an unsettling rhythm. "Your species has spent most of its development killing each other." Tahoe nodded carefully. "We have had a violent past, but we've learned from it." "Have you?" asked another counselor, this one resembling a tall insect. "Your world maintains military forces even now. Most evolved species abandon warfare entirely." The room fell silent. Tahoe felt sweat form on his brow. The Galactic Concorde represented over 300 peaceful alien civilizations. They had mastered faster-than-light travel, cured disease, and ended hunger, all without the bloodshed that marked human history. "Our military exists primarily for defense and humanitarian aid," offered Gina, another human diplomat. "We haven't had a global conflict in over 60 years. The alien representatives exchanged glances, their body language suggesting skepticism. "You misunderstand," said Counselor Nava. "Many species in the Concorde evolved without predators. They never developed your fighting instincts. Your capacity for violence is extraordinary among sentient beings." Tahoe felt a chill. "Are you suggesting humans are uniquely dangerous?" "The evidence suggests humans are uniquely bloodthirsty," said Nava, using the word that would soon follow humanity throughout the stars. "Your entertainment glorifies combat. Your children play games simulating war. Even your sports involve physical confrontation." Tahoe wanted to argue but held back. First contact protocols were clear: avoid confrontation at all costs. "Perhaps what you see as bloodthirst is simply our way of channeling natural competitive instincts," he suggested. "These same traits drive our creativity and innovation." The meeting continued for hours. The humans showed their achievements in medicine, art, and conservation. They explained Earth's united governments and peaceful cooperation. Still, the aliens remained wary. Finally, Counselor Nava rose. "The Concorde has deliberated. Earth will be granted provisional membership, with restrictions." The relief in the room was palpable, though short-lived. "Restrictions?" asked Tahoe. "Human ships will be limited in size and armaments. Human settlements will be confined to 10 designated systems, and no human may serve in Concorde security forces." Tahoe swallowed his pride. "We accept these terms with gratitude." 6 months later, Tahoe stood on the observation deck of Concorde Station 7, watching ships of all shapes pass by. Humans had begun integrating into galactic society, but not as equals. They were given the hardest jobs, the distant outposts, the risky mining operations. Still admiring the view, Minho asked, joining him at the window. Once a general, now he served as a simple transport pilot. "I'm admiring our potential," Tahoe replied. "Give it time. Time won't matter if they've already decided what we are," Minho said. "Did you see the new educational materials? They literally describe humans as an unusually aggressive species requiring careful monitoring." "We'll change their minds," Tahoe insisted. Their conversation was interrupted by a station-wide announcement. "Attention all personnel. The colony on Proxima Delta has gone silent. All communication lost 12 hours ago." Tahoe and Minho exchanged worried glances. Proxima Delta was a human outpost. In the following days, reports came in piece by piece. Something had attacked the colony, something never before encountered by the Concorde. Of 2,000 colonists, only 50 survived, rescued by a human emergency response team that had ignored Concorde protocols ordering them to wait for official investigation teams. At an emergency council meeting, Tahoe listened as Concord officials debated how to respond. "It must be an isolated incident," said one. "Perhaps the humans provoked whatever attacked them," suggested another. Tahoe finally stood up. "With respect, we have survivors with valuable information. My people have experience with crisis management. Let us help." Counselor Nava regarded him coldly. "Your kind always sees threats requiring forceful response. The Concord has maintained peace for 900 years, through diplomacy and understanding, not military action." As Tahoe left the chamber, his communication device beeped. 2 more colonies had gone silent, neither of them human. The bloodthirsty humans, it seemed, were the only ones prepared for what was coming. Ju Kim stood at the command center of the human defense vessel Resilience, watching with steady eyes as data streamed across the large view screen. Her uniform bore no official Concord insignia. Humans weren't permitted command positions in the Galactic Defense Force. But out here, on the edge of known space, such rules mattered less than survival. "Another colony gone silent," reported Ensign Dodian, his voice tight with concern. "That's the 4th this month." Ju nodded grimly. "Pattern. Same as the others, Commander. All communications cut simultaneously. No distress signals. No escape pods launched." Dodian's fingers danced across the holographic interface. "The Concord investigation team is scheduled to arrive in 3 days." 3 days, Ju repeated, shaking her head. "By then, whatever happened will be long over." The Resilience wasn't supposed to be here at all. Officially, it was a trading vessel. Unofficially, it carried a crew of former military personnel who monitored the frontier settlements, particularly human ones, knowing the Concord's response protocols were dangerously slow. "Commander," came a voice from the communication station. "We're receiving a broken transmission from Outpost Helios." Juwoo's head snapped up. "Helios. That's only 2 light hours from here." The message crackled through the speakers. "Under attack. Unknown entities. Request immediate. Not responding to communication. They're consuming the transmission cut off abruptly." Juwoo didn't hesitate. "Set course for Helios. Maximum speed. Alert the medical team to prepare for casualties." "Commander," Do-Yun said carefully, "Concord protocols clearly state." "I know what the protocols state," Juwoo cut him off. "And I know 50,000 people live on that outpost. Move." The Resilience tore through space, pushing its engines beyond safety limits. When they arrived at Helios, the sight that greeted them chilled even the most experienced crew members. Dark, organic-looking shapes swarmed around the outpost. They weren't ships in any conventional sense, more like living organisms, each the size of a small building, with tendrils that burrowed into the station's exterior. Parts of the station were already gone, seemingly dissolved. "What are they?" whispered Do-Yun. "I don't know," Ju admitted, "but they're not here to talk." The Resilience's sensors picked up life signs from a sealed emergency bunker deep within the station. "Survivors. Prepare rescue shuttles," ordered Ju. "Arm all crew members. Whatever these things are, they're hostile." The rescue mission was chaos. The creatures, which the crew began calling Void Swarm for their black, shifting forms, seemed to consume everything in their path. Metal, plastic, organic matter, all dissolved when touched by their tendrils. Minho, the security director, led the ground team. His military training, once dismissed as barbaric by Concord officials, now proved invaluable. His team fought their way to the emergency bunker, where 300 survivors huddled in terror. "They came without warning," gasped a station engineer as they were evacuated. The Concord communication officers tried to establish contact while they were already breaking through the hull. Back on the Resilience, Ju watched the rescue operation with growing dread. The Void Swarm entities began to notice the rescue shuttles, turning their attention to these new targets. "We can't save everyone." Minho's voice came through the comm. "We need to leave now." It was the hardest order Ju had ever given, but she gave it. "All shuttles return immediately." We leave in 10 minutes. They escaped with 317 survivors out of 50,000 inhabitants. 5 days later, in the Concorde Central Chamber on Lumina, Zhuwu and Tahoe Park presented their findings to a skeptical council. "These claims seem exaggerated," said Councillor Nava. "Perhaps it was a natural space phenomenon you misinterpreted." "We have visual evidence," Zhuwu countered, playing the recordings, "and survivors who witnessed the attack." "Humans are known to have active imaginations," another counselor remarked, "and a tendency to perceive threats where none exist." Tahoe stepped forward. "With respect, counselors, this is not imagination. We've tracked similar patterns at every colony that went silent. Something is systematically attacking outposts, and it's moving inward toward more populated systems." The head scientist of the Concorde, a tall being with translucent skin, studied the data with more interest than his colleagues. "These readings are unusual. The matter dissolution pattern suggests some form of accelerated consumption process." "Exactly," said Zhuwu eagerly. "Whatever these things are, they're feeding. And they're getting bigger after each colony they consume." "Even if this threat is real," said Councillor Nava, "the Concorde has maintained peace for 9 centuries through diplomatic engagement. We will send a communication team to establish contact." Zhuwu couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You want to talk to them? They consume everything they touch." "Not everything," corrected the head scientist, pointing to the data. "They seem to prioritize energy sources and organic matter. Perhaps their needs could be met through negotiation." Tahoe tried another approach. "At minimum, we should evacuate the colonies in their projected path." This suggestion caused murmurs among the council. Mass evacuation would cause panic, disrupt trade, acknowledge a threat many weren't prepared to face. "We will consider evacuation if diplomatic efforts fail," Councillor Nava finally decided. "Until then, we thank you for your information, but ask that you refrain from unauthorized military actions." Outside the chamber, Zhuwu could barely contain her frustration. "They're going to get everyone killed." Tahoe nodded grimly. "The problem isn't just their pacifism. It's evolutionary. Most Concorde species never faced serious predators. They lack our instinctual responses to danger. Then we need to help them develop those responses quickly," said Zhuwu. Over the next 3 weeks, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The communication team sent to contact the Void Swarm never returned. 3 more colonies went silent. Finally, alarming news arrived. A Void Swarm entity had been spotted near Solara, a major Concorde world with billions of inhabitants. In an emergency session, Zhuwu watched in disbelief as the Concorde leadership debated proper protocol, while a live feed showed the Void Swarm approaching Solara. "We need immediate evacuation and a defensive perimeter," she interrupted, breaking formal protocol. "We've analyzed their movement patterns. They'll reach the main settlement within 20 hours. The council room erupted in confused discussions. The concept of rapidly organizing a military defense was foreign to them. Their emergency protocols were designed for natural disasters, not attacks. "We can help," Tahoe offered. "Human ships in the sector can coordinate evacuation. We have experience with this kind of rapid response." After precious hours wasted in debate, the council reluctantly agreed to allow human assistance. By then, the first Void Swarm entities had already reached Solara's outer atmosphere. As human ships rushed to evacuate as many as possible, Zhuwu received permission to analyze a small piece of Void Swarm material recovered by a science team. Under the microscope, the truth became even more terrifying. "It's a collective organism," she reported to Tahoe. "Each entity we see is actually made of billions of microscopic units working together. And they're adaptive, already evolving to process different materials more efficiently." "Can they be stopped?" Tahoe asked. Zhuwu looked at the sample, watching how it attempted to consume the containment material. "Everything can be stopped. We just need to find their weakness." As night fell on the Concorde capital world, news arrived that Solara had fallen, with only 30% of its population evacuated. The threat could no longer be ignored, but the Concord had no military to speak of. They had only the humans, the species they had labeled as bloodthirsty. And now, those humans were their only hope. Brilliant white towers shattered one by one as the void swarm descended upon Lumina, the jewel of the Galactic Concord. What had begun as a distant threat now engulfed the capital world itself. The crystalline spires that had stood for 1,000 years collapsed under the relentless assault of the dark, shifting entities. Captain Hyunbin stood at the entrance of the central government plaza, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. Around him, dozens of human security personnel directed terrified aliens toward evacuation ships. "Move in orderly lines, 4 per group. Keep moving," he commanded, trying to maintain some semblance of order amid the chaos. The aliens, beings who had created wonders of art and science, who had built a peaceful society spanning hundreds of worlds, stood frozen in the face of danger. Their evolutionary history had never required fight or flight responses. Many simply stopped walking, their minds unable to process the immediate threat. "They're shutting down," said Lieutenant Soman, rushing to her captain's side. "It's like their brains aren't wired for crisis." Hyunbin nodded grimly. "Physical guidance only. 1 human per 10 civilians. Carry them, if you have to." Across the plaza, humans who had once been relegated to menial jobs, deemed too aggressive for important work, now became the backbone of the evacuation effort. They lifted children, supported elders, and sometimes simply carried unresponsive adults bodily to safety. In the sky above, the first wave of void swarm entities broke through Lumina's upper atmosphere defenses. The thin shield of Concord vessels, designed for scientific exploration, not battle, offered minimal resistance. "Captain, we've got 6 minutes until they reach the plaza," warned a communications officer. Hyunbin looked at the thousands of civilians still waiting for evacuation. "We need more time." Without waiting for authorization, he activated his combat suit, a piece of human military technology officially banned on Concord's central worlds. "Summon, get these people on the ships. I'm going to slow them down." "That's suicide," she protested. "No," he replied with a grim smile. "It's duty." Hyunbin wasn't alone. Across the plaza, 24 other humans, former soldiers, security consultants, even a few civilian volunteers, activated similar equipment. They formed a defensive line between the advancing void swarm and the evacuation zone. "The bloodthirsty humans are fighting for us," whispered a Concord elder as he was guided to a shuttle. "Why?" The human helping him smiled sadly. "Because that's what we do." In the emergency command center established in orbit, Tahoe Park faced the remnants of the Concord Council. Of the original 12 members, only 5 remained, the others either dead or missing in the attacks. "The evacuation is proceeding, but too slowly," Tahoe reported. "We need immediate authorization to deploy the human defense fleet." "The human what?" asked Counselor Nava, her 4 eyes widening in shock. After the first attacks, several human colonies pooled resources to build defensive vessels, explained Tahoe. "It's not much, 40 ships with minimal armaments, but they're crewed by experienced personnel." "You built military vessels without Concord approval," accused another counselor. "We built rescue ships with defensive capabilities," corrected Tahoe. "And right now, they're your only chance to save your people." The council chamber fell silent, broken only by alert signals as another section of the planet fell to the void swarm. "How many more need to die while you debate?" asked Ju Kim, who had joined Tahoe in the meeting. "Every minute you wait, thousands more are lost." Counselor Nava's skin paled. "We never imagined, never prepared for this kind of threat." "We know," said Tahoe gently. "That's why we're here. Let us help you." After a brief discussion, the council surrendered emergency authority to the human commanders. Within hours, human defense vessels positioned themselves as shields for the evacuation corridors. They couldn't stop the void swarm, but they could slow it down, buying precious time for civilians to escape. On the surface, Captain Hyunbin's defensive line held just long enough. As the last civilian shuttles lifted off, he watched the void swarm entities surround his position. Fall back to emergency extraction point. He ordered his remaining team. They ran through the once beautiful streets of the capital, now darkened by the consuming presence of the swarm. 3 of his team didn't make it. Hyunbin himself barely reached the extraction shuttle, the back of his combat suit partially dissolved by a swarm tendril. As the shuttle broke atmosphere, Hyunbin looked down at the planet. Lumina, once a beacon of peace and prosperity, now wrapped in darkness. The fall of peace had come swiftly and without mercy. In the days that followed, the surviving Concord leadership established a temporary government on Sanctuary Station, a deep space installation. Representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered, bringing tales of devastation and confusion. Tahoe stood before this assembly, feeling the weight of history on his shoulders. The Void Swarm has consumed 23 major worlds and over 100 smaller colonies, he reported. Their advance continues at an accelerating rate. At current speed, they will reach every inhabited world in the galaxy within 1 standard year. Murmurs of despair rippled through the assembly. But there is hope, continued Tahoe. Humanity stands with you. We've established defensive lines around major population centers. Our scientists are working to understand the swarm's weaknesses. Our ships are coordinating evacuations where defense is impossible. An elder representative from a distant world stood up. Why do you help us? For centuries, we treated humans as lesser beings, called you bloodthirsty, restricted your rights. Tahoe looked at the gathered representatives, seeing fear but also a dawning understanding in their eyes. Because that's what humans do, he said simply. We fight, not because we love violence, but because we hate seeing others suffer. What you call bloodthirst, we call protection. In her makeshift laboratory on Sanctuary Station, Ju worked tirelessly with a team of human and alien scientists. They had gathered samples of void swarm material, studying its properties and behaviors. It's evolving, she told Tahoe during a rare break. Each world it consumes, it adapts to process new materials more efficiently. Can we stop it? Asked Tahoe. Ju pointed to a simulation showing the swarm's hive-like structure. We believe there's a central consciousness, a governing intelligence. If we can locate and disrupt it, the entire swarm might collapse. As she spoke, emergency alarms blared throughout the station. A void swarm scout entity had been detected approaching Sanctuary. How did they find us? Asked a panicked Concord official. They're tracking energy signatures, explained Ju. Our shields, our engines, everything that powers civilization creates a footprint they can follow. The human defense fleet moved to intercept the scout, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time. Sanctuary Station would need to be evacuated. As the evacuation began, Tahoe watched human soldiers helping Concord civilians board emergency transports. The sight filled him with a bittersweet pride. Humans had always been protectors at heart, something the Concord was only now beginning to understand. Where will we go? Asked Counselor Nava, now one of Tahoe's strongest allies. Where can we be safe? Tahoe thought of Earth, beautiful, resilient Earth, with its history of overcoming threats and disasters. We fight, he said firmly, not just for survival, but for a future where all species understand each other better, where peace isn't built on ignorance of danger, but on the determination to face it together. As Sanctuary Station emptied, a new coalition was born, one that valued both the Concord's peaceful wisdom and humanity's protective strength. The fall of peace had revealed a hard truth. Sometimes, the only answer to violence was resistance. And in that moment of greatest need, only the bloodthirsty humans had known how to fight. Admiral Sujin stood at the center of the command deck, her weathered hands resting on the holographic display table. Around her, a mix of human officers and Concord representatives watched in silent attention. The star map before them showed the advance of the Void Swarm in red, a growing darkness consuming system after system. "We don't have their numbers," Sujin said, her voice calm but firm. "We don't have their biological advantages. But we have something they don't. We understand fear, and we know how to use it." A tall Concord representative shifted uncomfortably. "Admiral, with respect, fear is not a tactical advantage, isn't it?" Sujin looked up, meeting the alien's eyes. "Fear keeps us alive. It makes us plan. It forces us to imagine the worst so we can prevent it. Your species never evolved fear because you never needed it. We did." The makeshift war room had been established on the human colony Nexus, now serving as the operations center for what remained of the Concord's leadership. Human military officers, once shunned by the Peaceful Alliance, now filled key positions throughout the command structure. "The Void Swarm operates like a perfect predator," continued Sujin, zooming in on footage of recent attacks. "It follows patterns. It expects its prey to flee in predictable ways or freeze in terror. What it doesn't expect is for its prey to study it, understand it, and fight back strategically." She gestured, and the display changed to show a small fleet of human vessels positioned near a mining outpost. "Operation Shadow Lure begins in 6 hours. For the first time, we stop reacting and start acting." The plan was distinctly human. A trap. The mining outpost had been evacuated but left operating remotely, its energy signature broadcasting like a beacon to attract the Void Swarm. When the entities arrived to feed, they would find not helpless prey but a fleet of human ships waiting in the shadow of a nearby moon, ready to test new weapons developed specifically to target the swarm. In the research lab several decks below, Dr. Dohyun moved between workstations, checking readings and adjusting parameters. His team of scientists, human and alien alike, worked frantically to perfect their latest breakthrough. "The frequency modulator is ready for field testing," reported a young assistant. "If it works, it should disrupt the swarm's neural connections within a 5-kilometer radius." Dohyun nodded, carefully lifting the small device. It seemed impossible that something so small could affect creatures so vast, but humanity's history was filled with such asymmetric victories. From ancient warriors using terrain to defeat larger forces to modern fighters using guerrilla tactics, humans had always found ways to overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. "This is how we've always survived," Dohyun explained to a curious Concord scientist. "We look for weaknesses. We adapt. We turn disadvantages into advantages." "Your species has a unique relationship with conflict," observed the alien. "You study it like we study art or philosophy." "Because for us, it's been necessary," replied Dohyun simply. "What you call bloodthirst began as survival." The operation at the mining outpost was a limited success. The frequency modulator confused several smaller swarm entities long enough for the fleet to destroy them, but larger ones adapted quickly. Still, it provided valuable data, and more importantly, it provided hope. Over the following weeks, human leadership transformed the nature of the conflict, where Concord forces had engaged in predictable patterns. Direct approaches, defensive formations. Human commanders introduced guerrilla tactics, strategic retreats, and psychological warfare. They discovered the swarm tracked energy signatures, so they created decoys to draw entities away from populated areas. They found that certain emissions disrupted the swarm's coordination, so they developed jammers to protect evacuation routes. And when direct confrontation was necessary, they fought with a ferocity that shocked their Concord allies. Captain Mincio led one such engagement near the Helios cluster. His small squadron of fighters deployed in an irregular pattern that confused the swarm's hunting algorithms. "They expect prey behavior," he explained to his pilots. "Don't give it to them. Move unpredictably. Strike from unexpected angles. Make them adapt to you, not the other way around." The skirmish lasted only 20 minutes, but it saved thousands of refugees on transports passing through the sector. When Minsu's squadron returned to base, Concord officials were waiting to study their tactics. "How did you know they would respond that way?" asked one official, reviewing the battle footage. Mincio smiled tiredly. We've been studying predator-prey relationships on Earth for centuries. Sometimes the best way to survive is to change the rules of the game. As human-led forces began achieving small victories, the Concord's perception of humanity gradually shifted. The term bloodthirsty still appeared in conversations, but now with undertones of respect rather than fear. In her lab, Zhu made the breakthrough they have been hoping for. By analyzing patterns in the swarm's movements across multiple systems, she identified what appeared to be a central coordination signal, evidence of a hive consciousness directing the entities. They're not just randomly consuming, she explained to Admiral Sujin and the Concord Council. They're following a complex expansion pattern directed from a central node. We've traced the signal back to this location. The hologram showed a distant system on the edge of the galaxy, a place of dense radiation and space-time distortions that had never been properly explored. If we can reach this point and disrupt the central consciousness, we might collapse the entire swarm, Zhu concluded. The plan was daring to the point of recklessness, particularly from the Concord perspective. It would require sending a strike force through heavily infested territory to reach the central node, a mission with minimal chances of success. We can't risk our remaining ships on such an uncertain operation, argued a Concord representative. We can't afford not to try, countered Sujin. Every day we wait, more worlds fall. The debate might have continued indefinitely, but news arrived that changed everything. The Void Swarm had been detected approaching Elysium, the sacred homeworld of the Concord's founding species. More than a planet, it was the spiritual and cultural heart of their civilization, a symbol of everything the Alliance stood for. In the emergency session that followed, Captain Hyunbin made an unexpected proposal. My ship, the Defender, and its escort fleet will place ourselves between Elysium and the swarm, he stated. We'll buy time for evacuation and defense preparations. A murmur ran through the Concord representatives. Everyone understood what Hyunbin was offering. His fleet was too small to defeat the approaching swarm force. This was a suicide mission. Why would you sacrifice your ships and crews for Elysium? Asked an elder Concord member. It's not your homeworld. Hyunbin stood straight, his expression calm. Because that's what humans do. We protect what matters, regardless of cost. Hours later, the small human fleet moved into position as the massive Void Swarm force approached Elysium. From the command center on Nexus, Admiral Sujin watched the tactical display with a heavy heart. She had approved the mission knowing what it meant. The battle was brief but fierce. The human vessels fought with everything they had, deploying all the tactics and technologies they had developed. For nearly 3 hours, they held the line, allowing thousands of transport ships to escape from Elysium's surface. When the last human vessel fell silent, over 80% of Elysium's population had been evacuated, millions of lives saved by human sacrifice. In the aftermath, as the Concord mourned both their world and the humans who died defending it, something fundamental changed in their understanding. The species they had labeled bloodthirsty had demonstrated a level of self-sacrifice that defied comprehension. They weren't fighting because they loved violence, said Counselor Nava in a solemn address. They were fighting because they loved life, all life, not just their own. With this new understanding, the Concord unanimously approved the mission to strike at the swarm's central consciousness. Human and Concord forces would go together, the wisdom of peace joined with the courage to fight when necessary. As the strike force prepared for departure, Admiral Sujin addressed the combined crews. Today we fight not as humans or as Concord, but as guardians of all life, she said. Remember those who gave everything at Elysium. Honor their sacrifice with victory. The combined fleet approached the edge of known space, where dense radiation clouds and strange gravitational anomalies marked the hiding place of the Void Swarm's central consciousness. Admiral Sujin stood on the bridge of the flagship horizon, watching as human and Concord vessels moved into formation around her. Final checks complete, reported Commander Ji-hoon. All ships report ready. Sujin nodded, her eyes fixed on the swirling darkness ahead. This mission represented the last hope for countless civilizations. If they failed here, the Void Swarm would continue its relentless consumption until the galaxy itself was empty of life. "Send the signal," she ordered. "Begin the approach." The fleet moved forward as one, human vessels taking point positions. This arrangement had not been ordered. The human captains had simply moved to the front lines without being asked. On a Concord observation vessel near the rear of the formation, a group of officials watched this unfold with growing understanding. "They're protecting us," said one, his voice filled with wonder. "Those they call Bloodthirsty are willing to die first." His companion nodded slowly. "I begin to think we misunderstood them from the start." The first wave of Void Swarm entities emerged from the radiation cloud, their dark forms shifting and pulsing with hungry energy. These were larger than any encountered before, ancient guardians protecting the heart of the collective. "All ships, engage according to your assigned sectors." Sujin's voice rang clear across all channels. "Remember, we fight not for conquest, but for life. All life." The battle erupted with fierce intensity. Human vessels darted and weaved in unpredictable patterns, drawing the larger entities away from the more vulnerable Concord ships. The tactics developed over months of desperate fighting now deployed in perfect coordination. In the heart of the formation, the science vessel Breakthrough carried the weapon they hoped would end the war. Dr. Do-Hyun watched nervously as his team made final adjustments to the frequency disruptor, a device designed to target the neural signatures that bound the swarm together. "The carrier wave needs to be stronger," he told his team. "We'll only get one chance at this." A violent impact rocked the ship, throwing several scientists to the floor. A Void Swarm tendril had broken through the defensive screen, striking the Breakthrough's port side. "Hull breach contained," reported the ship's eye. "Primary systems still operational." Do-Hyun helped a fallen colleague to her feet. "Continue the calibration. We're almost there." On the horizon, Admiral Sujin received the damage reports with growing concern. The battle was not going well. Despite their preparation and courage, the Void Swarm entities near the central node were stronger and more intelligent than any they had faced before. "We need to get the Breakthrough closer to the center," she told Commander Ji-hoon. "But that corridor is heavily defended." Captain Minseo's voice came through the communication system. "My squadron will clear a path." Sujin looked at the tactical display. Minseo's fighters were already damaged from the initial engagement. A direct assault on the central corridor would mean certain destruction. "Acknowledged, Captain," she said after a moment's hesitation. "May your aim be true." Minseo's squadron launched a daring attack run, drawing fire from the largest swarm entities. As predicted, few of the fighters survived, but they created the opening needed for the Breakthrough to push forward. Dr. Do-Hyun felt the science vessel accelerate toward the heart of the swarm. Through the viewport, he could see the swirling center of the anomaly, a pulsing mass of dark energy that seemed to bend light around it. "That's it," he whispered. "The central consciousness." Years of scientific training had not prepared him for this moment. The entity before them was like nothing in known biology, a vast intelligence born perhaps in another galaxy, driven by hunger but guided by cold calculation. "Disruptor at full power," reported his assistant. "Ready to deploy on your command." Do-Hyun took a deep breath. "Activate." The device hummed to life, sending carefully modulated waves of energy outward in an expanding sphere. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, the nearest Void Swarm entities began to twitch and contort, their coordinated movements becoming erratic. "It's working," someone shouted. The disruption spread outward like ripples in water, affecting entity after entity. At the center of the anomaly, the dark mass pulsed violently, as if in pain. From the horizon, Sujin watched in amazement as the swarm began to fragment. Entities that had moved with perfect coordination now collided with each other, their movements chaotic and purposeless. "All ships, focus fire on the central mass," she ordered. This is our chance. The combined fleet turned its weapons toward the heart of the swarm. Human and Concord technology fired in unison, striking the weakened central consciousness with everything they had. A blinding flash filled the viewports, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. When vision returned, the central mass was dissolving, breaking apart into billions of inert particles. Throughout the galaxy, reports began coming in of void swarm entities suddenly stopping, drifting lifelessly in space. Without the guiding intelligence of the central consciousness, the collective had collapsed completely. The long nightmare was over. 3 months later, Tahoe Park stood before the reformed Concord Council in their temporary headquarters on New Lumina. The chamber was filled with representatives from hundreds of species, many wearing symbols of mourning for lost worlds. But there was also hope in their eyes, the first real hope since the swarm had appeared. The rebuilding efforts are proceeding on schedule, Tahoe reported. The abandoned swarm material is proving valuable for reconstruction. Our scientists believe the particles can be reprogrammed for creative purposes rather than destructive ones. Councillor Nava, now serving as head of the council, nodded approvingly. A fitting transformation. From death comes new life. She stood, addressing the full assembly. Before we continue with administrative matters, there is something important that must be addressed. The chamber fell silent as Nava turned to face Tahoe directly. For centuries, the Concord viewed humanity through a lens of fear and misunderstanding.